We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has done a dangerous deal with the Greens to ram through his toxic taxes. Prime Minister, will Australians with a self-managed super fund face higher tax bills because of your dangerous deal?
Order. Members on my right can take their seats and remain silent when questions are being asked. The member for Spence is warned. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much. The proposals, consistent with other measures that were put forward, are grandfathered, of course. But what we're not prepared to do is to sit back and accept that Australians are locked out of what is a broken housing system in this country. And
Order.
To say that we're going to do nothing about it. Nothing about it.
Order.
And we, of course, have a majority in the House of Representatives.
Order. Members on my left, the member
but
for
in
Bowman.
the Senate, we don't have a majority. And therefore, we have to engage constructively. Those opposite in the three right-wing parties all choose irrelevance. They all choose irrelevance and not to debate. Although it must be said that the member for Canning has said in his party room that he wouldn't bend the knee to One Nation. A real contrast with the bloke, the current leader of the opposition, who, when asked a question about monoculturalism 4 times, couldn't give an answer, Mr Speaker. Could not give an answer.
Chief Government Whip. The member for Bennelong will leave the chamber under 94A for continual interjecting within 30 seconds of the House. Order. The manager on a point of order.
It's just irrelevant, Speaker. The question was about whether Australians with a self-managed super fund will face higher tax bills. No, you haven't answered it. The people would like a straight answer.
Yeah. Order. Resume your seat. I just appreciate the manager, if he raises on his feet, to raise a point that he doesn't give extraneous material when he raises his point of order. So you don't need the extra commentary. He'll get the call. The Prime Minister was asked a direct question. He has directly answered that question about the issue that he was asked about. So, within the first 30 seconds, he answered the question. So, anyway, order. The Prime Minister has the call.
And those opposite move a point of order about relevance when they make themselves irrelevant, because what they do, whenever they see, before they even see legislation, before they see proposals, they're against them. They're against them. And now they've said they'll repeal the legislation. Sound familiar, Mr Speaker? It's exactly what he said they would do if they were elected in May 2025, when they promised to repeal tax cuts. Well, what this legislation provides for is less tax and a working-class tax cut for every single Australian worker.
The manager.
Every single Australian worker will get a tax cut, but they'll repeal it. That's what they've said. They'll repeal the legislation on day one, says Senator Cash. Well, we'll continue to advance the interests of Australians, whether it's giving every worker a tax cut or whether it's giving every Australian the opportunity to aspire to own their own home. Not just some, but every Australian.
Order. Before I call the member for Gorton, I've got a number of people they'll recognise during question time today, as it's Local Government Week. The first person I'd like to recognise is Wayne Farnham, the member of the Legislative Assembly from the Parliament of Victoria, and the following councillors and mayor: Councillor Virginia Tasha, the Mayor of Brimback City Council, Councillor Melissa Taylor and Councillor Rebecca Van Hoff from the Toowoomba Regional Council, and Councillor John Raven from the Mayor of the City of Logan. Give the call to the honourable member for Gorton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's tax reform and cost of living relief help Australians get ahead? And how does that compare to other approaches?
Call to the Treasurer.
Speaker, I thank the member for Gorton for a question, but also for the outstanding contribution she's already making to our team as a first-term MP. This is a really important day for tax reform in this country. Today we make progress on the difficult but necessary reforms which have been in the too hard basket for too long in Australia. Today we are one step closer to a fair go for first home buyers, more tax cuts for Australian workers and a fairer tax system, Mr Speaker. Now, economic reform and especially tax reform is never easy, but it's worth it. And every time there's major tax reform in this country, there's multiple pieces of legislation, multiple waves of consultation, and that's what we are engaged in right now, Mr Speaker. But securing the agreement of the parliament for our tax reforms means that we are now putting the core elements of those reforms in place. We're also giving effect to the details the PM and I announced in Sydney last week, which means every active small business now has access to concessions and carve-outs, Mr Speaker. And we're strengthening the rules that limit borrowing by super funds, consistent with the recommendations of the Murray Review that those opposite commissioned, and dealing with the risks identified by the financial regulators. Now, Mr Speaker, the three right-wing parties in this country have vacated the field on reform, and they've left first home buyers and workers hanging as a consequence, Mr Speaker. That whole three-ring circus over there shares a divisive anti-worker agenda. They don't support tax cuts for workers or a fair go for first home buyers. And as the PM said, Senator Cash in the other place has said that they will repeal this legislation. Now, we've heard this story before when the member for Hume last said that they should repeal tax cuts. That's one of the reasons why they sit over there in much fewer numbers than in the last parliamentary term, Mr Speaker. They shouldn't have listened to him then. They shouldn't be listening to him now. And by repealing the legislation, get this, by repealing the legislation, they will be taking the small business concessional threshold back from $10 million down to $2 million, Mr Speaker. What a genius. Do not listen. Do not listen to the member for Hume, Mr Speaker. We are delivering cost of living help and we are delivering real change. We're making petrol and diesel cheaper in a temporary, targeted and tapered way. We're delivering higher wages and lower taxes for workers in an ongoing way. That's paid for by reforms which make it easier for young people and first home buyers who have been locked out of the housing market in this country for too long, Mr Speaker. Addressing that challenge is what today is all about. It's why the agreement of the Senate is so welcome and so important.
Far too much noise during that answer. I'm not happy with the level of noise or yelling that is occurring. Interjections, but not yelling. So if people continue with that, we've got to just kind of take this temperature down today because it just keeps going and going and going, and it's in no one's interest for that to continue. Give the call to the honourable member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. To ram through Labor's toxic taxes, the Treasurer has changed his position again and done a dangerous deal with the Greens. In May last year, the Treasurer said the government had, quote, no intention of bowing to Greens' demands to restrict self-managed superannuation funds investing in property. How can Australian people believe or ever trust another thing the Treasurer says?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As we made it clear in the press conference earlier today, we've agreed to support this amendment to reduce the risk to retirement savings and to secure the passage of these really important reforms to make the tax system fairer. Now, we know the member for Goldstein doesn't want to make it easier for first home buyers. We know he doesn't support our efforts to cut taxes for workers. He doesn't support our efforts to make the tax system fairer, Mr Speaker. Now, multiple inquiries have raised concerns about these arrangements that we are addressing in the amendments in the Senate, Mr Speaker. David Murray was appointed by those opposite to look at these arrangements. and he said that direct borrowing by super funds is inconsistent with the objectives of superannuation to be a savings vehicle for retirement income. The Murray inquiry said a prohibition would preserve the strengths and benefits of the super system, has delivered to individuals, the financial system and the economy, and limit the risk to taxpayers, Mr Speaker. And so we've made it clear that this is a relatively minor change but an important change, not the same as has been proposed in earlier elections, but with a similar objective. And this is all about extending the ban on borrowing, strengthening the ban on borrowing by superannuation funds, but in a way that ensures that people who are doing it now will be grandfathered so that they can continue to do it. There's a responsible 45-day transition period for people who might be midstream in the process, Mr Speaker, and that's important as well. So these are responsible changes. Now, Mr Speaker, I was also asked about trust in what people say in this place, Mr Speaker, and so I draw the House's attention. To something that the
Order. The manager on point of order.
Relevant Speaker. The question was very specific. It was about trusting the Treasurer. So we look forward to hearing about how we can trust the Treasurer.
The question was, how can Australians trust what the Treasurer says? At the end, that's correct. So the Treasurer can answer that any way that he sees fit. It wasn't specific. Order. The Leader of the Opposition, when you've completed your interjections, will continue. Okay. The Treasurer in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This government is cutting petrol taxes. We're cutting income taxes. We're making it easier for first-home buyers. We're making the tax system fairer. I'm asked about trust in what people say in this place, and I draw the House's attention to the Shadow Treasurer said earlier today, cheaper prices are not flowing through to the Bowser in Australia. And I wanted to point out to the Shadow Treasurer, he's asking me about whether we can believe things that people say in this place. Petrol prices in Sydney since the end of March are down $1 per litre. In Melbourne, 99 cents, in Brisbane, 97 cents, in Perth, $1.03, in Adelaide, $1.07. Canberra 89 cents, Hobart 94 cents, Darwin 97 cents. And the same when it comes to diesel, Mr Speaker. And so, of all the people that I would take a question from about accurate statements, the Shadow Treasurer would be at the very, very end of that list.
Give the call to the honourable member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture. How is the Albanese Labor government working with our wildlife and agricultural industries, along with state and territory governments, to help respond to the detection of H5 bird flu in Western Australia?
Call to the Minister for Forestry, the Minister for Agriculture and the Minister for Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank our member for Hasluck and the other Western Australians in this place, as well as other members, because I know a lot of people are really interested and concerned about this H5 bird flu detection in wildlife in Western Australia. And I want to reassure members we are taking this very seriously, but importantly we're also acting. As I advised here yesterday, there are now 2 confirmed cases of the H5 bird flu in migratory birds. Both were located in an isolated area in WA's Esperance region. I repeat, at this time, there is no evidence of any mass mortalities. There's no evidence currently of any infections in our poultry or our agricultural systems, and there is a low risk to human health. As I have said repeatedly, with the global spread of the H5 bird flu, we cannot stop migratory birds from bringing the virus to our shores. That's why we have been preparing and working around the clock with a swift and coordinated response. We've enacted our national biosecurity response arrangements, with the Western Australian Government managing the on-ground response. We have enhanced surveillance activities that have been implemented in collaboration with industry, with veterinarians, with wildlife carers and with local communities. Further tests are currently being undertaken by the Western Australian Government, and we'll work with them to provide an update as soon as the initial test results do become available. Our technical experts continue to meet on a regular basis and will guide the next steps in our response as more information, such as testing results, becomes available. Enacting this swift response is part of our government's significant work to bolster our preparedness and response and capabilities to the H5 bird flu, because of course we have seen the devastating impact that this has had globally in wildlife populations. As part of delivering over $2 billion in additional biosecurity resourcing since we've come to government, that has included more than $113 million specifically towards our H5 bird flu preparations. This includes investments that we've made to strengthen early detection surveillance, and we've seen that working, and to deploy rapid response equipment in every state and territory, work that has been recognised by both our wildlife and our agricultural industries. We had Dr Carol Booth from the Invasive Species Council say, and I quote, "We are pleased to see the serious and rapid government response to this detection. The preparation, planning and coordination over the past 2 years means Australia is in a strong position to respond." And I also want to reiterate today my thanks to the Australian public. Ordinary Australians have been incredibly diligent in reporting sick birds, and they are our first line of response in our biosecurity system. If you see sick or dead birds or other animals that are dead, please do not touch them. Avoid contact, make the record of what you see and where you see it, and contact birdflu.gov.au. Thank you.
A call to the member for Kennedy.
Question to the Treasurer. Mr Treasurer, some 900,000 student visa holders are now living in Australia. The number of temporary visa holders is increasing at 1 million a year. Clearly, within 10, 13 years, the people that are not born in Australia will outnumber the people born in Australia. Treasurer, the cost, when one considers that 92% of these people are going to Sydney and Melbourne, where there are no jobs, all industry has fled those cities. Could you explain how you're going to handle the financial situation arising from these appalling numbers?
Call to the Treasurer. Treasurer has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Kennedy for his question. Of course, in this country, the net overseas migration numbers have been coming down quite considerably. They were absolutely surging when we came to office. They're now down about 45% from their peak. And in the most recent net overseas migration numbers, which were released last week, they were down once again, their lowest level in a few years, Mr Speaker. And so those are the facts. I know that those opposite, as they desperately trying to cosy up to one nation, dispute those facts, but those are the facts in the ABS data, Mr Speaker. Now, when it comes to employment, including in our major cities, this government has seen lower average unemployment than any government in the last 50 years. And we're proud of that record when it comes to the labour market, Mr Speaker. Once again, those are facts. Now, I know, Mr Speaker, and I'm not accusing the member for Kennedy of this, but if you have a look at the quite ridiculous answer, for example, that the Leader of the Opposition gave to a very simple question about the monoculture today, you can see that what's going on over there, one of the reasons why the Liberal Party is dying in his arms, Mr Speaker, is because his efforts to out one nation, are becoming increasingly pathetic, Mr Speaker.
All right, just get the Treasurer to resume. Order. Order. The member for Cornwall, the Minister for Social Services. I want to hear from the manager.
No, what they were. Thanks, Speaker. It goes to relevance. The question was about the rise in net overseas migration under the Labor government. You should come back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who listened to that question would think that it's not a narrow question. There was a lot in that question. So if you asked a question with a lot in it, you'll get an answer with a lot. And the Treasurer is order. The Leader of the Opposition, just going to ask you to assist this continual banter. Well, whoever you're talking with, I'm just going to ask you just give it a rest for a while. And ministers as well. Just everyone, I need to hear the question, need to hear the answers, and it'll just help the House if this continual conversation just has a pause for a while, at least. The Treasurer in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm responding to the interjection of the Leader of the Opposition, who's chirping at me about Australian values. Well, this side of the House understands that a key Australian value is a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. This side of the House recognises the Australian value at the core of making it easier for people to buy their first home and not their 20th home, Mr Speaker. This side of the House recognises in Australian values the vast and important contribution made by multicultural Australia, Mr Speaker. Not for this side of the House, this rubbish playing footsie with the monoculture language being pushed around by the One Nation Party, Mr Speaker. He was asked again and again to define and defend basic Australian values, and he is unable, unwilling, incapable of doing that, Mr Speaker. And this is why the Liberal Party is dying in his arms and on his watch, Mr Speaker, because everybody knows what's going on. His efforts to out One Nation are looking more and more pathetic with each passing day, and that's what's going on over there, Mr Speaker. This right-wing party and that right-wing party and that right-wing party are all the same. They've all got a divisive anti-worker agenda. We think workers and young people and first-home buyers are absolutely essential to Australian values, and our policies reflect that.
Before I call the member for Boothby, I'll just do the next batch of local government officials that are with us today. We have Councillor Russell Webb, the Mayor of Tamworth Regional Council, Councillor Sean Zorro Radnich from the Mayor of the mighty Merwere Shire Council, Councillor Robert Mustoe, the Mayor of Richmond Valley, and Councillor Gavin Morris, the Lord Mayor of Newcastle. Give the call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government rewarding Australians' hard work and encouraging aspiration? How does this apply to policies including the recent budget?
The member for Boothby,
and what are the alternatives?
I'm going to ask. We're not having commentary, particularly from the Leader of the Opposition. When he asks a question, he expects the House to be silent, and I give him that courtesy, always. How about we say the same for the member for Boothby? So, no point pointing. I just want you to sit there and listen to the member for Boothby. People listen to your question out of respect. Show the member for Boothby respect. It's not a hard concept. People ask the question in silence, then people can make their decisions on the answers, but not before that. Member Boothby will begin her question again, and I'd like everyone to show her respect. Member Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government rewarding Australians' hard work and encouraging aspiration? How does this apply to policies, including the recent budget, and what are the alternatives being offered?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Boothby for her question, and we on this side of the House stand for aspiration for all, not just for some. The opportunity that generations of Australians have fought for, including those Australians who've come from overseas for a better opportunity. A better opportunity not just for themselves to work hard and to aspire to a better life, but a better opportunity for their children and grandchildren as well to come. That is our vision for Australia, and that is what our reforms are about. Everything that we do, whether it's making the tax system fairer, whether it's rewarding hard work with tax cuts, making Medicare stronger and more accessible, giving people the opportunity to upskill through free TAFE, building our resilience by investing in Australian manufacturing and a future made here in Australia. Or, of course, helping young Australians who hold the aspiration of buying their first home achieve that dream. Now, around the country, more and more first-home buyers are getting a fair crack. In Unanderra, in Cunningham electorate, Blake Torreson, the selling agent, said this: "The home was sold the day of the scheduled auction, has been purchased by an Illawarra first-home buyer. In Shortland electorate of Pat Conroy, in Cardiff Heights, said this, that an auction drew 7 registered bidders, all first home buyers. Paul Campbell, the estate agent, we have a lot of first home buyers looking and they're not competing against investors right now. In Tighes Hill, in the electorate of Newcastle, Jesse Wilson, the listing agent.
Order.
We had a first home buyer, a young family and a young couple bidding on it, and it went to the first home buyer. In Calwell, Nick Fernandez, the estate agent who sold the home. The owner's over the moon and so is the first home buyer. In the electorate of Melbourne, in South Melbourne, in the electorate of Melbourne, at one auction the successful bidder had spent more than a year trying to buy. This is what they said. I think it's great to encourage younger buyers rather than investors making more money all the time. It's giving young people a shot at it. And that is precisely what we are doing, Mr Speaker, through these reforms, giving young people a shot at the stability that comes from owning a roof over your own head. For too long, the housing system has been broken. We're doing something about it, taking action, delivering real change, making a positive difference.
Before I call the member for Lindsay, the member for Lyne, you're going to leave the chamber for that uncontrollable yelling at the end of that answer. We're just not going to have people screaming and yelling. It's just everyone take a breath. I've got a few people on warnings, but if that's not working, there'll be no warnings. So everyone just do better. We'll move to the next question. Member for Lindsay has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. To ram through Labor's toxic taxes, the Prime Minister has changed his position yet again and done a dangerous deal with the Greens. Will the Prime Minister rule out agreeing to the Greens?
We're going to start again. Just as the member for Boothby, it's a two-way street. The member for Lindsay is going to begin her question again. The Minister for Infrastructure has warned.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
All right, the member for Lindsay can get on with her question.
My question is for the Prime Minister. To ram through Labor's toxic taxes, the Prime Minister has changed his position yet again and done a dangerous deal with the Greens. Will the Prime Minister rule out agreeing to the Greens' demand to remove grandfathering on negative gearing?
Give a call to the Prime Minister. Order. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for her question. I really do.
Order.
Because we have had legislation which passed the House of Representatives, which is the reform that we think is appropriate. We now will have it carried by the Senate on Thursday. And yes, we have secured a majority in the Senate. Because those opposite, the three right-wing parties, didn't take Dennis Shanahan's advice and actually engage in debate. What they chose to do was do what they consistently do, which is to just say no before they've seen any detail, before they've seen the legislation, and then now they've promised to repeal it. Well, there is a very big difference, of course, between us and those opposite. We're building 55,000 social and affordable homes over 5 years through the HAP. They built 373 over the decade they were in office. We've helped 260,000 Australians into their first home with 5% deposits. They want to gut the scheme and said that it would only benefit the children of billionaires. Remember that? We're throwing everything at housing supply.
The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Lindsay asked a very political question. It contained a lot of matter in it, but I'll give her a fair go. Member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On relevance, I asked the Prime Minister, it's an important question for Australians, particularly those trying to get ahead. Will he rule out, agreeing with the Greens, to remove grandfathering on negative gearing?
Thank you. Resume your seat. The Prime Minister was asked about the legislation that has been ushered through the other place and what deals have been done about a particular topic, but he's being directly relevant. When you've got a question framed like that, there's going to be some political commentary because it was a political question, which is fine, but the Prime Minister is being directly relevant.
Negative gearing, what we support, which is to not support the same position as the Greens political party, because unlike this leader of the opposition, who allows the One Nation tail to wag the Liberal and National Party dog, what we do is we stand up for our values, and our values is to make sure that grandfathering is there in negative gearing and in the changes that we've made. We've made sure as well that negative gearing can still occur, but what they'll be doing is investing in new homes, not existing ones. So the examples that I just used, Mr Speaker, the examples that we're seeing right around the country on Saturdays is that for the first time in a long while, young Australians are getting a fair crack because they're not competing against investors who have taxpayers supporting their bids. It has changed the whole competition which is there and is enabling first Australians to have a fair crack. What they want is to reinstate the tax breaks for property investors across the board, is what they've said, and take away the gains which are made. We have a $47 billion Homes for Australia plan. They didn't even bother to have a housing minister most of the time they were in office.
Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Whitlam.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government helping Australians with the cost of fuel and the cost of energy? What policies would increase costs on Australians?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question. The very powerful way she represents the constituents from her beautiful part of the world in this House. And, Mr Speaker, in the face of the largest energy crisis the world has ever seen, it's important that Australians know their government has got their back through this crisis, and the announcement made that we will extend the fuel excise relief for another month shows Australians, Mr Speaker, that we understand that this international crisis has a long tail, will have impacts for some time, and we will continue to provide the support as necessary, as has been outlined by the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. And that's real and valuable relief as Australians go to the Bowser each and every day. But also, Mr Speaker, when it comes to energy bills, we continue to supply support. And one of the ways we do that is through the cheap home batteries policy, Mr Speaker, one the House I know likes to get updates on. And I'm pleased to tell the House that as of today, 448,342 Australian households have taken up an Albanese government cheaper home battery. And as we've said before, this is particularly the case in the outer suburbs of Australia. And I can update the House, Mr Speaker. There are now 4 electorates where less than a year into this program, this program turns a year old in 1 week's time. In less than a year, there are 4 electorates that now have more than 10% of their households with a cheaper home battery, Mr Speaker. They are the electorates of Greenway. The Attorney-General is very proud of that, Mr Speaker. The electorate of Mitchell is another one, Mr Speaker. Not sure how the member for Mitchell feels about that, but given his margins, 3.8%, and there's 10% of households with a battery, bit of a conflict for him. The member for Mayo, Mr Speaker, is in a similar boat with more than 10%, but also the electorate of Wright, Mr Speaker. More than 10% of the households of the electorate of Wright have a cheaper home battery, which, as it happens, is also more than his margin of 7.9%, Mr Speaker. But I've got better news for the member for Wright. Based on current trends, he's about to take over the member for Mayo as the most popular electorate for cheaper home batteries in Australia, Mr Speaker. Queenslander. That's a great result, Mr Speaker. Queenslanders taking up cheaper home batteries, reducing their bills each and every day, but also reducing the bills for everyone. And the other thing we're doing is supporting Australians with their choices to buy electric vehicles if they choose to, through the new vehicle efficiency standard and the electric vehicle tax cut. Now, what brings all these policies together, cheap home batteries, new vehicle efficiency standards and the electric vehicle tax cut, is that they would all be abolished by the opposition. They stand against them all. When they have a chance to stand with Australians and the choices they choose to make to reduce their energy use, to reduce their bills, to reduce their emissions, we stand with them in those choices. We support the choices they make in the electorates of Mitchell and Wright and electorates right across Australia. And those opposite just don't get it. They would stop that support for Australians cold, stone dead. They would take that support away, Mr Speaker, but we will continue to provide that support and we will continue to support Australians in the choices they make.
Call to the member for Nichols.
My question is to the Prime Minister. To ram through Labor's toxic taxes, the Prime Minister has changed his position again and done a dangerous deal with the Greens. Will the Prime Minister rule out agreeing to the Greens' demand to abolish the diesel fuel rebate?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. It strikes me as passing strange, Mr Speaker, that those opposite say that the legislation that is before the Senate is so terrible that they had to rule out any support for it before they'd even seen it. And now they're asking a series of questions about not things that are in the legislation, but things that aren't, Mr Speaker. Things that aren't.
Order. Order. The member for Goldstein's warned and has the MPI.
And then they have the hide to interject from the chief yapper over here, Mr Speaker, that we have made sure to get a majority in the Senate.
Order.
That we have spoken to other people in the Senate besides Labor senators in order to secure support. But today, of course, we did welcome our 30th senator in Tammy Tyrrell into the caucus, and that was a good day. What we do, is to draw a very big distinction between us and other political parties. We're prepared to cooperate where people are prepared to engage, including the Greens were engaged in constructive discussion over this legislation. But we have a very different political view, Mr Speaker, and I've fought the Greens for the last 30 years, it must be said, Mr Speaker, in my electorate. Pretty successfully, it must be said, Mr Speaker.
Order. Pause. Prime Minister will pause. The Manager of Opposition Business.
It goes to relevance, Speaker. The Prime Minister is tax maxing with the Greens, and we want to know whether—
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. If we're going to go down that path with commentary in using points of order just to get TV grabs, we're not going to allow— You simply get up and just ask the point of order. We're not having a period where extra comments and— That wasn't part of the question, and the manager knows that. So I will revert back to what we were started to do, is I won't take points of order if they're going to be abused in such an egregious way. There just won't be points of order, and we can go through the examples where the speakers have done that. I don't wish to do that, but that is where this is heading if those spurious points of order continues. The Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, being asked about the Greens political party, there's now one of them over there, Mr Speaker. One. There were four. We knocked out 3 of the 4 at the last election because we took a very different position from the Greens political party, as we consistently do. Now, my job isn't to give advice to this bloke, but my advice is, how about you stand up to One Nation on something? How about you prepared to follow this bloke's leadership and not bend the knee when asked questions like, do you support monoculturalism for Australia? Not a complex question, because we've never been a monoculture. We have different people, of different faiths, different ethnicities, different backgrounds are what make up Australia, and it must be said, have made up Australia forever. This is a pining for a time that has never existed in this country, opining for a time that has never existed. The First Fleet had people in chains and people were in charge. Had Protestants and Catholics. It had a multicultural society, and it continues to have one.
Order. The Minister for Small Business is warned, and the member for Barker will leave the chamber under 94 for continually interjecting non-stop. And we will now hear from the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. How is the Albanese government helping more Australians achieve the dream of home ownership? How is this approach more beneficial than others?
Do this again. I don't know why this is so hard. Everyone gets treated fairly in the same way. The member will begin his question again. We don't need people interjecting when they're asking questions. So let's do it right and do it properly, and the member for Hughes now has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. How is the Albanese Labor government helping more Australians achieve the dream of home ownership? How is this approach more beneficial than others?
Good. Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thanks so much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Hughes for his question. We are just about to tick over 1,000 of his constituents getting into their home ownership opportunity with the support of our government. What a great moment for them. Because, Speaker, the member for Hughes and our government understand that there is no greater aspiration in our country than the aspiration to own your own home. And that's why home ownership is at the heart of our bold, ambitious Homes for Australia plan. Speaker, today in our country, more than half of all first home buyers in the market are getting support from the Albanese government to own their first home. We are now, Speaker, almost at 270,000 Australians who have gotten into home ownership under our 5% deposit program. Now, Speaker, the 5% deposit program is all about getting first home buyers to auction sooner. Our budget reforms are about levelling the playing field when they get there. And, Speaker, the results are starting to speak for themselves. On average, more than 115,000 first home buyers have purchased a home each year under our government. Speaker, this is more than any other Australian government in our history. Now, Speaker, I'm asked about alternatives, and Speaker, the coalition of the Liberals and the Nationals and One Nation have spent years attacking almost every measure that our government has put in place to support first home buyers. Speaker, you're not going to believe this. They want to cut Help to Buy, a program that does nothing more than help 10,000 Australians on low and median incomes get the opportunity they deserve to get into home ownership. Speaker, they don't support the expansion of the 5% deposit program and have said that they want to roll that back. Now, when it comes to our tax changes, Speaker, you're not going to believe this, but the Shadow Minister for Housing has not only said that he wants to roll back the level playing field that we are creating, he actually wants to put investors on an even higher platform. He is talking about a new regime that actually gives a bigger CGT discount for investors, Speaker. How could you come up with that idea? Now, Speaker, it is very hard to avoid the conclusion that those opposite have declared war on our nation's aspiring first home buyers. But let's have a little look, Speaker, at what their constituents think. The member for Hume opposite me is groaning. Well, he might be interested to know that 1,370 of his constituents have bought under the 5% deposit program. Speaker, the member for New England has decided not to show up today. 2,292 of his constituents have bought under the 5% deposit program. And, Speaker, the member for Latrobe, where's my friend the member for Latrobe? We have supported 6,000 people in his electorate get into the dream of home ownership. Speaker, that is far more than his margin at the last election. Speaker, it's abundantly clear now. Those opposite are the only people in our country who can't see that we've got a broken housing market. To the young people of this country, I say Labor sees you, we see your aspiration, and we are giving you the support you need to get the home ownership opportunities you deserve.
Before I call the member for Parkes, I'll do my final welcomes for all of our wonderful mayors that are with us today. Councillor Athena Pascoe-Bell and Councillor Wayne Bayliss, the Mayor and Deputy Mayor of the City of Palmerston. Councillor Travis Barber, the Mayor of Streaky Bay Council. Councillor Jodie Swapper, the Deputy Mayor of the City of Karratha. Councillor Naomi Fowler from the Gold Coast, and Melissa Jones, the Mayor of Walkerville. And finally, Mayor Scott Jeffrey, the Mayor of Strathbogie Shire Council. I give the call to the honourable member for Parkes.
My question is to the Prime Minister. To ram through Labor's toxic taxes, the Prime Minister has changed his position again and done a dangerous deal with the Greens. Will the Prime Minister rule out agreeing to the Greens' demand to impose a tax on the family home?
Order. Members on my right, the Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I suspect that there might have been a change of mind from those opposite, because earlier on, when the Leader of the Opposition gave a press conference and was asked at least 6 occasions about monoculturalism and whether he supported it or not, he was saying that he was opposed and they were going to reverse the legislation that's before the Senate. But what they've done is come into question time and they don't seem to oppose anything that is going through the Senate, because what they're doing is talking about everything but.
Order.
Everything but. What we want, Mr Speaker, is to support first home buyers to have their own home. We want more Australians owning their own home, not less. Those opposite, and it goes directly to the question asked, those opposite are opposed to more Australians owning their own home, because the measures that we've put in place are directly relate to that. Not just these measures, but the past measures as well. That's what Help to Buy is about, a shared equity scheme to get more Australians into home ownership. That's what the 5% deposits is about. That's helped 260,000 Australians into their first home. That's what the changes to take away the advantage that investors have over first home buyers at auctions around the country is about. Increasing home ownership. We are the party of home ownership. They are the opponents of home ownership, Mr Speaker. They are the party that think it's more important that an investor get their 10th home than that a first home buyer gets their first home and a roof over their head, Mr Speaker. And we see it.
The member for Parkes.
Speaker, it's on relevance. It was a very simple question. Will you rule out the demand from the Greens to impose a tax on the family home?
Prime Minister. Yeah, that's one part of the question, but the Prime Minister has answered that part of the question early in the answer. Order. 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 And I know the member would like a yes-no answer, but order. The Prime Minister needs to be directly relevant. I can't make him answer the question you'd like him to, but as long as he's being directly relevant, he's within the standing orders.
Speaker, I'm being directly relevant because not only do we think the first home and the family home is sacrosanct on this side, we want more Australians to have it. That's the point.
Order.
That you're opposed to. That you're opposed to.
Order.
That you're opposed to. In Balmain, in the electorate of Sydney, a young family just recently got into a home on Saturday. In the electorate of Cook, Luke Lombardi, a sales agent, has seen an uptake in interest from first home buyers this week. I've had a few properties on the market for an extended time. I've seen multiple offers this week. That is what is happening right around the country. Labor supporting people into their own home, which is so important. Those opposite just opposed to it.
Get the call to the honourable member for Petrie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government's investment in defence providing critical capability for Australia's Defence Force, as well as creating export opportunities for well-paid, secure jobs? Why is this better than the other approaches for Australia's defence?
Call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for her question and acknowledge her service in the Australian Army. The Jindalee Operational Radar Network is an incredible technology. It relies on bouncing a signal off the ionosphere, the ceiling of our atmosphere, to detect objects beyond the curvature of the Earth's surface, a radar which can literally see over the horizon. It's a technology which was developed back in the 1980s by Defence Science in combination with BAE at a time when there was not the same system of satellites as exists today. But in a world where those same satellites can now be targeted, this is a technology which is coming back into its own. As the best long-range radar in the world, it is the envy of the world, and that is why Canada has agreed to partner with Australia in its future use by building its own radar to surveil the vast areas of Canada's Arctic North. This is a $2.5 billion deal. It is the biggest defence export in Australia's history, and it's an example of successful defence policy, focusing on the detail, meticulously building our relationships, having a clear sense of the strategic objectives of our partners so that we can properly engage. Now, that stands in stark contrast to how we know the Liberals do defence. Because for the Liberals, the defence policy is just about a single figure, a percentage of GDP, but at the same time not having an ability to articulate a single military platform upon which the defence budget would be spent. Now, we've known for some time that the Liberals are defence dilettantes, but last week we also learnt that One Nation is no better. They did promise to cut health and education to fund defence, but when it came to defence, again just a focus on a single number, leaning into the vibe of the thing and then hoping for the best. The Liberals, One Nation, they are the Dennis Denudos of defence policy. Well, this government is very different. We are getting on with business. The two biggest defence exports in our country's history have happened under us, and the latest deal with Canada will support 1,000 direct and indirect jobs across South Australia and Victoria. These are deals which are building high-tech industry in Australia. They are deals which are increasing our national security. They are deals which are helping to keep Australians safe.
The call to the honourable member for Farrer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management. The 1997-2010 millennial drought bruised. The 2017-19 tinderbox wounded Australia. Is Australia's irrigated water capacity, post the Murray-Darling buybacks, strong enough to secure Australia's food supply for both human and stock operations during the next prolonged drought? And have you negotiated a water allocation from the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder for food production during the next periods of drought?
Order. Give the call. Order. Give the call to the Minister for Emergency Management, the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank you for your question. Whilst emergency management takes into account rapid onset events, it doesn't actually take into account drought events, so I will hand over to the Minister responsible for water in the House to answer the question.
Call to the order. Give a call to the Leader of the House representing the Minister for Water.
The question goes as well to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and the question goes to what happens to water allocations during times of drought. And obviously, as the member would be more aware than most people in the chamber, the different sorts of water security. So, for example, in the southern areas of his electorate, there are areas which have very low water security, whereas the licences in a place like Griffith on the Murrumbidgee tend to have high water security. That affects what is planted. You're more likely to have opportunity crops like rice in areas where the water security levels change radically, and you'll have permanent plantings, like oranges, for example, in areas such as the Riverina, in areas around Griffith, for example, where the water security levels are much higher. What the Murray-Darling Basin Plan did was—
The Minister will pause. The minister's concluded his answer. We'll move to the next question. Give a call. Order. Thank you, Member for Farrer. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the Chief Government Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering better outcomes for working Australians, and what could put this progress at risk?
Call to the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Lawler for her question and her ongoing advocacy for hard-working Australians in her electorate, but right around the country. Of course, the Albanese Labor government has introduced significant reforms to support Australian workers and get wages moving. Our government has passed laws to improve enterprise bargaining, bringing employers and workers back to the table. And as a result, we've seen a record number of employees benefiting from higher wages. We're also backing workers through our same job, same pay reforms. Before these reforms were in place, labour hire workers were doing the same work, wearing the same uniform, turning up to the same shifts, and were getting paid less than direct employees. Now, I recently met with Scott, a coal miner in the Hunter with the member for Patterson, who told me that at his site, labour hire workers are now receiving $40,000 a year more because of this government. Now, these workers are some of the thousands of workers across Australia receiving pay increases and, importantly, are now being treated fairly. Of course, this Labor government has advocated each and every year to the Fair Work Commission to boost the pay of low-paid workers. And from next week, minimum award workers will receive a wage increase of 4.75% in their pay packets. This represents a real wage increase and important cost of living relief. Now, critically, those that rely, the lowest paid workers that rely on the national minimum wage will receive a 6% pay increase from next week. Now, we're not only backing workers by supporting higher wages, but of course we're backing them to get a fair go in the tax system. This Labor government is delivering tax cuts, with the average worker benefiting by up to $2,800 a year. Now, Speaker, I'm asked what could put this progress at risk. Well, the biggest risk to working Australians is the three right-wing parties over on that side, the Liberal Party, the National Party and One Nation. All three of them voted against same job, same pay, which is delivering higher pay and fairer conditions. All three railed against our reforms to reinvigorate enterprise bargaining, which is now delivering higher wages and better conditions. And of course, in the last few weeks, all three failed to back a wage increase for our lowest paid workers in this country. It is only a Labor government that can be trusted to be on the side of working Australians.
Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In March last year, the Prime Minister said, "I don't negotiate with the Greens." When will you stop lying?
The order, the Leader of the House. I'm going to demand that be withdrawn immediately, and I'm tempted to take further action because this cannot. No, you're not going to be able to phrase or withdraw. I've made it crystal clear yesterday and this time before. You are demeaning the dignity of this House. For 125 years, those sorts of descriptors have not been used. Traditions and conventions are important in this House of Representatives, and I will uphold them every single day of my time as Speaker. Order. I'm going to get the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw to assist the House.
I withdraw.
And we'll move to the next question. Out of respect for the Leader of the Opposition, he's not being named. But if this continues, I'll be left with no other choice. This is a deliberate defiance of the conventions and traditions of this House. I believe in traditions and conventions. Order. And I want this House to uphold its principles and dignity. Language matters. Every speaker has followed this tradition. I don't know why those on the opposite benches cannot follow what every other person in this House has done. Give the call to the member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government finishing the job of rolling out a reliable and future-proof national broadband network? What other approaches has the government been asked to consider?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for Cunningham for her question and acknowledge her relentless advocacy for improved telecommunications in her community. Mr Speaker, the Albanese Labor government is getting on with the job of providing every Australian with reliable, high-speed broadband by ripping up coalition copper and installing future-proof fibre. Our vision is absolutely clear, making Australia the most connected continent on the face of the earth. No matter where you live or what you do, you deserve the ability to connect, whether it's so you can work from home, run a business or stay in touch with those you love. In July of last year, I updated the House on the Albanese Labor government's investment in the NBN. Since then, I'm pleased to report that 90% of the NBN's fixed-line network is now able to access gigabit speeds. That's over 10 million homes and businesses. This was possible because of our 2022 investment to upgrade 1.5 million premises from coalition copper to full fibre. That work was completed on time and on budget by NBN Co. Their dedicated work continues, with tens of thousands of homes and businesses making the switch to full fibre every month. More customers are also taking up higher speed tiers, helped by NBN's Accelerate Great program, which has given speed increases at no additional wholesale cost. Work is also complete on NBN fixed wireless and satellite upgrade program, which, thanks to the Commonwealth investment of $480 million, is now providing up to 5 times faster speeds over fixed wireless. These upgrades have also expanded the fixed wireless footprint to some premises that were on satellite services. This in turn allowed for an increase in the performance of the existing satellite service. Last year, I also spoke about finishing the job and upgrading the final 622,000 premises on coalition copper to faster technologies, predominantly full fibre, with the Albanese government investing up to $3 billion. One thing that hasn't changed since last year is our belief, Labor's belief, that the NBN should always remain in public hands. Unfortunately, one other thing that hasn't changed since last year is the views of those opposite. In 2024, the Coalition opposed the Commitment to Public Ownership Bill, leaving the door open to privatising the NBN if they are returned to government. Let me be clear. Labor will make no apology for fixing the Coalition's mess and delivering equitable access to high-speed broadband.
The call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Seniors. Minister, the Kooyong community recently mourned the loss of Neil Danaher. Neil fought motor neurone disease with dignity and strength. I have another community member, Graham Crossham, also living with MND. Graham's 80. He's ventilator dependent and he needs 24-hour care. But your integrated assessment tool says he doesn't qualify for the highest level of support. It's a disgrace. Minister, how can you possibly justify your integrated assessment tool to Australians like Graham?
Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Seniors.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Kooyong for her question. And I thank her for her engagements with me and my office in regards to aged care matters. I'm very familiar with Mr Crossan's case. It is indeed a very difficult situation that he and his family face. I also acknowledge his wife, Mrs Crossan, and the care that she provides and the advocacy that she's provided on his behalf throughout this difficult period for their family. Out of respect to their privacy, I'm not going to go into the specific details of their case in the chamber, although as his representative.
The member for Kooyong on a point of order.
Speaker, the Crossans would very much appreciate if you could deal with the specifics of Mr Crossan's case in this House.
Well, the minister has made it clear how he's going to handle the situation, but I thank the member for Kooyong for allowing the House to consider that. But the minister will be able to is entitled to answer to make sure he's directly relevant. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, out of respect to the privacy for the Crossan family, as I would for any older person across our country, I'm not going to outline the specifics of their case in this chamber. I'm most happy to meet with you in a more appropriate setting and indeed with the Crossan family if necessary to work through the specifics. Nevertheless, I am remaining constantly briefed on the situation of Mr Crossan and the circumstances that he faces. In a more general sense, I want to make some comments about motor neurone disease and how it's dealt with within the aged care system, because that is relevant to this particular case, amongst others. As everyone in this chamber would know, MND is a rare, incurable and fatal condition, and one of its main devastating characteristics is its rapid deterioration in physical function. Now, as you point out, earlier this month we lost Neil Danaher, who was a giant of the AFL, but more importantly, an absolute legend when it came to advocating for awareness and, of course, for a cure for this cruel disease. Because of the speed at which the condition of people with MND can change, the government has amended the aged care rules to recognise MND as a discrete, specific condition warranting urgent priority under our aged care system and specifically under support at home. This change will give all older Australians with MND priority access to the Support at Home program. The change applies retrospectively, meaning that older Australians with MND who have been already assessed and were waiting for Support at Home place, as well as those approved in future, will be prioritised for urgent access to their funding. This reflects our government's willingness to listen and adjust where the evidence tells us to. We're guided by people's experiences of the aged care system and will keep refining to ensure that the system is one that people can trust. I reiterate to the member for Kooyong my willingness immediately to meet with her and discuss in greater detail the situation facing Mr Crossan and the Crossan family and to continue to work to get the very best outcome for Mr Crossan and for all sufferers of this horrible disease.
Give the call to the member for Tangney.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to make quality early education and care more affordable and accessible? What has been the response? Thank you.
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Can I thank my friend, the totally awesome dolphin training member for Tangney, for his question. Mr Speaker, childcare isn't a nice-to-have for more than 1 million mums and dads across the country. It's an essential service. And we're rolling out 5 big reforms to make it better, to make it fairer and to make it safer. The first of those are our cheaper childcare laws, and you'll remember they were opposed by the Liberal Party. They're also opposed by the Liberal Party with the orange logo up the back. And I can tell the House that after 3 years, those cheaper childcare laws have saved the average family now more than $11,000. That's the first. The second is the 3-day guarantee. It's been in place for about 6 months, and that's already helping tens of thousands of kids from poor families to get access to early education that were denied that before. Again, opposed by the Liberal Party and opposed by the orange Liberal Party up the back. The third is building childcare centres where they don't exist at the moment, including in primary schools. So if you're a mum or a dad and you've got a kid at school and you've got a kid at childcare, that means one drop-off, not two. Once again, opposed by the Blue Liberal Party and opposed by the Orange Liberal Party. Number 4, the biggest safety reforms that have ever been made to childcare. That includes banning mobile phones, that includes the CCTV trial, that includes mandatory safety training, and that's supported by everyone across the chamber. And the 5th is the 15% pay rise. Now, I told the House yesterday that when we came to office, childcare workers were leaving the system in droves, not because they didn't love the job, but because love doesn't pay the bills. And they could earn more money stacking shelves than they could educating our kids. That's now changed. Because of that 15% pay rise, we now have 20,000 more workers in our childcare centres today than before that pay rise, something the Liberal Party never did, something One Nation would never do, something this Labor government has done, and it means more money in the pockets of workers across the country, but not just that, because you've got to apply and you've got to commit to 2 conditions to get this funding. First is a cap on your fees. That means parents pay less than they otherwise would. Parents will save about $1,500 over the next 2 years. And second, you need to meet the national safety standard. There is nothing more important than the safety of our kids. I think all members of parliament would agree making centres meet that standard is important. So this is the trifecta: more pay for workers, keep prices down for parents, and more work to keep our kids safe.
Report to the Prime Minister. Order. Members on my right and left will cease interjecting. House will come to order. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I ask further questions be placed in the notice paper.